Hello. A question came up during a session with a group of people about what happens in the analytical. What are the sequence of changes in findings over time that happen as a person changes? I think that's the simplest way to say it. We typically think about this in the sequence of a person becoming myopic. Paul Harris, spent a bunch of time going over the writings of Skeffington early on. And I noticed there were just lots and lots and lots of words, but very few diagrams. So I decided that it was important to try to, for me, to help me understand, but later it became a teaching tool, to make some kind of graphic or image from this. So there are just two that I made here, and I'll share them and explain them. So this is clinical signs of change. These are our findings. And the cycle begins. Now, what I'm showing in this diagram are just the near findings, the findings that we take at near that are part of our analytical. You'll see in the next figure, and again there are only two, I'm going to add in what happens at distance. One of the missives we hear all the time from the pioneers, those whose shoulders we stand on, is that the problems begin at near and spread to distance. So as the cycle begins, and by the way, what's the driving force of these cycles? Well, it's the stress of doing sustained near-point activities. So we jump in, and the first thing that we see at near is the shift from the expected 6XO to either less XO or shifts into ESO, low esophoria at near. All other findings, both at distance and near, would be at expected values. By expected, I'm using that as part of the Skeffington analytical sequence, that each of the findings has an expected value for the person who could meet the demands of stress, the normal levels of stress, not abnormal levels of stress, and come away unharmed. That would be pretty much the definition of an expected. So the first thing that happens is at near only, we see the shift from the 6XO to less XO or even into ESO. The next thing that happens while that is maintained or sustained is that the recoveries drop. So this would be at our base out and base in at near. The recoveries drop. What's happening? The patient is disembedding. They're getting ready to allow for a change to occur. So again, at this point, the nearophoria is being maintained at less XO or some ESO. The recoveries drop. And next, both of the near breaks drop. So the base out break should expected is 21, the base in break is 22, and we may see those both precipitously drop to in the range of 6 or 8, 7, but there's this massive drop, and it's usually fairly symmetrical. So these three things happen in sequence. And then what happens is the 14B, or the fuse cross cylinder, drops. The person is now showing less plus acceptance at near, and one can think of that as a refractive change at near. Continue over time. Again, the thing that's driving this is the stress of sustained near-point activity. We continue over time. The brakes begin to rebuild. Remember, in step 3, the brakes dropped precipitously. They rebuild, but after this first time through, and each successive time through, the total range typically builds to a smaller range than what we had before. So if the person was at the expecteds, 21 for the base outbreak and 22 for the base inbreak, that's a 43 diopter range. This range will typically build back to less, maybe only 40, 20, and 20. Each one has given something up. Interestingly, they may build back asymmetrically. The total range might be 40, so it's a smaller range, but it might be 30 one way and 10 the other. That's rather exaggerated and typically doesn't happen, but we want to leave the possibility there that it's not that each finding builds to less than it was, it's that the total range typically builds. Next, the recoveries come up. Again, this is at near. What's happening at that point when the recoveries come up? Well, the person is embedding the change in that refraction at near, this FCC in the 14B changing, decreasing in plus. This is now becoming embedded, not just as if, but now embedded. Now the ESO shifts to either less ESO or back into EXO. Typically the person does not attain the 6 EXO that we had at near beforehand, but it doesn't, again, always shift in that absolute way. And at that point they would have completed one cycle around. Now, the next image that I'm going to show, the outer part of it is exactly the same. The only thing I've done is add to the inner part, and the inner part shows the distance changes. So here we've added these, and I want to start the whole cycle again from the beginning. From the beginning, cycle begins. The only thing that happens is step 1 at near. Nothing actually happens at that first stage at distance. It's quiescent, it's just quiet. So we get this change, less EXO, more ESO at near. Then the recovery is dropping only at near. And generally, around the time the brakes are dropping at near, we begin to see the first step in the changes at distance. And here, the half EXO at distance, on our 3 or our 8 finding, the distance phoria through the habitual, or the distance finding through plano, or through no lens at all, through their habitual, if that's the way they came in, that half EXO drops and again shifts into ESO. So if you look at a slice through this, at this point in the analytical, you'll see ESO both at distance and near. And then we continue. Now, as we drive around this oval, each time something's happening out at near, there's a lag between that happening at distance as well. So if you notice, the step 1 at near is less EXO, more ESO. Well, that's the same step 1 at distance. At near, step 2, recoveries drop and the patient is disembedding. Step 2 at distance is the same, recoveries drop and the patient disembeds, but there's a time lag. Step 3 at near, brakes drop, same thing here at distance, and you can work your way around all 7 steps, with there simply being a time lag between what happens at near and what happens at distance. So this is encapsulating this idea that the problems begin at near and spread to distance. The constant driving force, the stress of doing sustained near vision activities. We like to think of each time around this whole oval as being about 3/4 of a diopter, on average, of change of both refractive changes at distance and at near. What's happening at near? The plus buffer first is given up The normal FCC or 14B finding is given up and it moves towards 0. At distance, that first plus 075 is given up and the person is moving towards emetropia. And both of these phorias may never come back to the amount of exo we expect, 6 exo at near, half exo at distance. And this gives the sense that it's actually a person who's gone through all of these steps one time that is the person who becomes the orthophoric emetrope. And this is part of why the general feeling is that the orthophoric emetrope is actually the person who in a prior time had been slightly hyperopic and had these little bits of exophoria both at distance and near, and had that little bit of hyperopia or buffer in the process of identification, just like the half exo at distance and 6 exo at near is a small buffer for the process of centering. These have value to the system, and they're one of the first things the person gives up as they go through these changes. So this is just a short little video to express what happens as a person lives with their visual stress, engages in the visual stress, and the sequence of changes in those findings. As you take a slice through any of these points in time, there's a particular configuration of all the findings in the analytical that will give you a sense of where is this person in the state of change. For more like this, please come to the website reinventingoptometry.com. This is all provided free and open to everyone to share education in what we do.